Looks like we're live here. Okay. All right. Well, so welcome everyone to episode 3 of a live stream series brought to you by my pals at Antelope Audio, where, we try to pluck a guest every month from this incredible pool of musicians and mixers and producers and DJs that are sort of huddled around this kind of quirky boutique pro audio manufacturer from Bulgaria, right? We're all a little insane about Antelope Audio. We love the gear. And we're sort of building some community around that, and this live stream is a part of that. So this month, I've actually got 2 guests, both of which have been doing as much Atmos mixing as anyone I know. They're both operating at the top of their field, and that tends to happen when a person is that magical mixture of sort of like on one hand a deeply musical heart and soul, and on the other just a technical wizard or nerd. So I've come to know that both of these guys definitely embody sort of both halves of that equation, and it really makes for great conversation on a thing like this. So I think this is going to be good. Both of these guys have my utmost respect as world-class recording engineers / mixers, and all 3 of us share a deep love of Atmos mixing along with sort of everything else that we do. So let's get these guys on screen and kick it off. Why don't we introduce them one at a time here, Vess? Let's bring out Bobby Holland.
Hey.
So Bobby, yeah, so you got a studio in Nashville called Pentaveret.
That's correct.
For everybody out in the cosmos, you can check out everything about him, his credits, info in his studio, etc. at bobbyholland.net. And then let's bring out Will. Hey, Will.
Hello.
So Will co-operates a studio here in Los Angeles called Studio Deluxe, alongside his work partner, we'll call him Matt Wallace. And you kids can find out as much about him as you would want to at willkennedyproducer.com. So thanks, you guys. Thanks for rolling out.
Thanks for having us.
So so there's, I don't know how we should start this thing exactly. Let's have a real Atmos centric talk here. There's been an awful lot. There's basically just a lot to cover, right? Let's monitor the chat as much as we can and sort of let, for everybody out there watching, please get in there, and we're super happy to sort of guide this conversation based upon comments. But there's been a fair amount of change in immersive mixing recently, and I'm sure I'm not the only head on this screen that has been rethinking sort of my template and really streamlining what used to be a super cumbersome process. Particularly, it wasn't that long ago that you really had to make a choice of what you were doing that day, if it was stereo or surround or immersive. And, we're kind of in this new realm, I feel like, these days, where we can start doing all this in one computer, for instance. And, my newest template, I'm not dealing with Dante, I'm dealing with timecode, and I can mix stereo or surround or immersive all at once. I can do it separately. It's all just a matter of how I route the outputs of channels. So let's get into it, you guys. How are you guys' setups going? I'm stoked on mine right now with the internal renderer and everything that I just said. But where are you, Will? Have you sort of moved into the new mode of working here?
So I am up to the, I believe, 17th different Atmos template session that I've had since we started 3 years ago. Right now we have we have 1 foot in the old way of doing things and 1 foot in the new way, because we have so many ongoing projects, and I desperately want to get us on the internal renderer and off of, because we have this little guy over here is our old Logic laptop that feeds us spatial audio over a Dante network. We want to get rid of that. But in order to do that, we have to rebuild the template. We have to rebuild our routing setup behind the scenes, and that makes going back to older projects that are sort of half completed very difficult. But I will say I'm very excited to be moving in that direction. So I kind of have this experimental template happening right now for us that is what the future is going to be, but we need to get through these last couple of projects before we can make the leap.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've said it. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to have such something that I can just sit down and work and not have to arm wrestle Dante and get into Dante controller and
yes,
and switching back and forth between like the constant, at least, and this is a Pro Tools centric thing for sure, but having to switch back and forth between the Dolby Audio Bridge and the HDX engine and this and that and the other, and and I/O setups, having to go back and forth, and even Avid, in the last 2 updates of Pro Tools, just having that a Dolby Atmos specific I/O window now is such a huge leap forward. It's just made everything simpler on that front, I think.
For sure. And what about you, Bobby? Are you using internal renderer and kind of moving forward here? Or are you kind of similar work, like kind of timing pickle?
No, I do have some lingering projects from external renderer. This room, I've got 2 rooms here. This one's 914 and the B room is 714. So internal renderer, just most recent release, started supporting 914. It used to support 714 and 916. So I either had to choose if I wanted to just work in 714 and not have the wides, or if I wanted to use external renderer. So a couple of lingering projects, but I've just kind of figured out a couple tricks. If I have to go backward, the order in which you open up Pro Tools, then load the I/O from the old session, enable. I was doing it all via aux I/O before, instead of using the. I think a lot of people use Playback Engine as Dolby Audio Bridge. I was using it. I was using the external renderer with aux I/O, which actually is in a video. I outlined that workflow in a video. I think it was in November with Antelope and Vintage King, knowing that the internal renderer was coming within a few weeks, but unable to talk about it. So anyway, I very immediately took a pretty big dive into the internal renderer, and this whole system is totally invisible now. It's honestly, the way I have the routing set up, I don't even have to think about like what Todd originally said, which is, are you working in stereo today or immersive today, etc. All I do is go in my Galaxy control panel, and that's where I change. It takes literally 3 seconds to change between stereo routing or immersive routing, and so in Pro Tools it's totally invisible. So yeah, I'm full on in the 914 internal renderer, and it honestly doesn't really take me much extra time to mix immersive, which is something I'd love to talk about in a minute.
Yeah. Well, so for anyone out there watching that maybe isn't working, like, a little unclear on maybe what we're talking about, or maybe isn't doing Atmos yourselves, I'm going to show you. I've got a funny graphic I'm going to pull up that I've at one point my setup was so complex that I had to make myself a map just to sort of keep track of it, right? How do we get that up, Vez? I've got a graphic there on the. There we go. So this is my map, and it's ridiculous. And I'm sure you guys get it. This is 2 computers. I don't need to go through the whole thing, but like I had to really, we all really had to put our thinking caps on a couple years ago to get this working, right? You had to create, if you wanted to have a spatial render, maybe you had a whole other computer running Logic. Well, I think you've got that going at this point, but it was very, very, very complex. So it's, to say that it's a relief,
and
it's a real relief to have these simpler setups. I can't overstate it.
And to go back not long before, the world kind of became more aware of Atmos when Apple launched spatial audio, maybe 6 months before that, you couldn't even run Atmos on just Atmos. Forget about spatial audio, just Atmos on one computer. You had to have one computer to run your DAW and another computer to run the Dolby software, and then either Dante or Maddie connecting the 2 to do the audio handoff.
Totally.
Which was insane. And
there's still a few people that I think have those setups, and maybe a talk like this can be inspirational to some of my friends that I keep going like, man, can I help you? It's time. It's
Yeah.
time. Like it's time to switch over because there's
Right.
an easier way. You know.
It's really not anywhere near as complex or as expensive as people think it is.
Yeah.
Now it was.
Yeah,
for sure.
Although
Yeah.
that said, the conversation that I tend to have a lot with folks is, oh, how expensive is it to do an Atmos setup? And what they want to hear is it's equivalent to doing a stereo setup. And it's not. It's just not. On the scale of expense, is it as expensive as building a 48 track tracking studio with a live room and a console? No. Is it more expensive than putting 2 speakers and a laptop in? Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
So
right.
there is that.
But to really get specific, you could totally do a Galaxy 32 setup and some Kali speakers, and quick math on that is going to be, I don't know, let's call it $5,000 in speakers and
it's more like
$5,000 in interface.
It's more like $7,000 in speakers.
So this is still a $10,000 and up proposition, and
to do it right. To do it right, yeah. But that's not. I mean, people spending $300,000-$400,000 a few years ago because they had to.
Yes. Yeah, and I think the early adopters were, depending on the speakers are obviously, the speakers in the interface / monitoring unit. If you have 2 separate ones, or if you're trying to buy a unit that does both at the same time, those are your big expenses, and the cost of those is where you can sort of adjust. If you want to buy PMC speakers and do a 9.1 or 2.6 system, yeah, you're going to spend $150,000. But can you do it for $20,000 or less and have a really good system? The answer to that is absolutely. And you can do it for less than 20.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got Kalis in here. I've got my
that's where
my surrounds
all around here.
I mean, fantastic for the money. And you guys may or may not know, but I even own a speaker company, and I've got my speakers elsewhere in the room, just not the surrounds. I honestly can't keep up with them to put my own stuff in here. I will ASAP, but these Kalis are fantastic, man. They're just wonderful for the money and really good as surrounds, especially. Yeah,
we early on, Matt and I. For those who don't know Matt Wallace, he's my mixing partner here, and when we decided to go into the Atmos route, we were talking to friends who had done very expensive PMC setups, and we were like, we don't want to spend that kind of money. We don't know what the future of the format's going to be, et cetera, et cetera. And so we were looking at keeping our costs down, and when we were casting around for, okay, we need to keep our speaker spend low, I looked at other manufacturers and I heard what I expected to hear. I was like, I haven't been in the market for cheap speakers for a very long time. And I was like, yeah, well, this is kind of disappointing, but this is what you get for the money, right? And then someone suggested Kali to me, and lucky for us, they're right here in Burbank. So they invited me over to the office. I met the folks. They're very smart people. And then I heard the speakers. I was like, am I hearing things? These sound so much like the difference between what I had been hearing at the same price point and these just shocked me.
It's no comparison. I've got the B room is Dyn Audio surrounds, and they're fantastic. But having the 3-way on these speakers is great. I mean, honestly, not to pump our sponsor here too much, but they're significantly more expensive. But the Antelope speakers are also outstanding sounding.
Yes, they are.
I've got a pair here, and I'm pretty into them. But let me ask you guys. So setups, speakers aside, that's all. So all that to say, it still costs. It's still not cheap. Let's say to get into Atmos, but it's doable. Mm-hmm. And then once you get in there, I guess there's so many different ways you can work. I'm interested to talk to you guys about. There's probably an infinite amount, but let's say for a minute that we narrowed down sort of a process of creating an Atmos mix into sort of 3 possibilities, which would be maybe let's call one like that classic thing where you mix into the bed, the 712 bed, and then maybe things that are going to be in motion that you create as objects, which is maybe sort of the classic. I think that's maybe this is arguable, but I think maybe that's how Dolby maybe envisioned a lot of us working. And then, early on, especially guys at Capitol and people that were putting together early 916 or 914 rooms realized that there was a limitation there that was just unusable. So this brought on this object bed way of thinking. And
All
then
credit
there's
to
sort
Steve
of,
Genowick for that.
yep. And then there's sort of a third way that one could work, and I've done all three. I can't decide what I like, honestly, and that's just making everything an object. And, you could argue that that's probably going to scale the best to future formats and things. If all your instruments are individual objects, you're going to have the best sort of like resolution in the room, but you also end up with very big files. And there's positive and negative things about all these things. I'm curious about how you guys work.
Yeah. Will, you want to go first?
Oh, I was going to say you should go first.
I'll go first. I will go first. I have very strong opinions on this.
Love it.
And mine is, let me take a step back to a little bit of concept first. And this is something that I may be a bit of an outlier on. I haven't talked to enough people that are like in Atmos rooms doing Atmos every day like I am. And the preface to all of my workflow opinions is that I think there's a gigantic misconception with Dolby Atmos, and that is that people treat it like it's surround sound. And Dolby Atmos is not surround. I mean, it can be surround, but it is also mono and stereo and 5.1. It's everything. And
yeah,
so,
I'm going to poke in for just a second, Bobby, to say I could not agree more strongly with that. And anybody, well, I've had multiple arguments on this front. So it's, oh, well, I've heard 5.1, so I know what this is. And I'm saying as someone who is a skeptic about Atmos precisely for that reason, this is not 5.1. It doesn't work the way 5.1 does. And the experience you have when you're listening is not at all the same as 5.1.
Prior channel-based surround formats are not comparable to immersive.
Yeah.
So where I'm going with this is very early on, maybe 3-ish. I probably started around the same time you guys did, Will, maybe 3.5 years ago. And I did a couple of dedicated Atmos, stereo mixes and then Atmos mixes. And then almost immediately I decided, man, no, if I'm gonna commit to this, I'm gonna do a single mix process. And so now I don't do dedicated stereo mix ever. I just mix everything in one session, and I spend, a large amount of my time listening to the stereo re-render with some clever routing and all that. So to restate that, Dolby Atmos is not surround sound, but it can be surround sound. So if you make an Atmos mix an afterthought, my very strong opinion is if you do a stereo mix or hire a mixer to do a stereo mix, and then you hire a quote unquote Atmos guy to take the stems and do some quote unquote fancy panning, you're doing a major disservice to your music. I feel very strongly that if you're going to need immersive mixing, you should hire a mixer that can do that, and that is the mix. And that mixer can decide if they want to do 2 mixes or not, but I personally don't. So to get to the original question, I'm spending most of my time with I've kind of always done the object bed thing. Just the 712 Pro Tools bed is, it's just not, it's clunky, and it's not, it gets in the way, and I understand the purpose, do a 712 bed and then do objects for anything in between or anything that moves. But I very quickly did adopt the object bed thing, and I've kind of just made that grow with the technology. So now I'm doing, actually Todd hit me to an idea when we were hanging out and I was in LA last month. So now I'm sort of ripping Todd a little bit, because I'm using 3 separate object beds that are all so a bed near is all out the near binaural settings, and then there's a mid bed and a far bed, and then all of those are actually being fed by 916 auxes. So the aux folder feeds the contents of the folder. It's a little bit backwards from how most people use folders, but then I'm able to treat the folder tracks that are 916. I'm able to treat those as sort of like mix buses. So I use multi-mono dynamics plugins and multi-mono EQ plugins, etc. So, and then if you link them as a group, the plugins all change together. And then if you need to do the mono side chain thing, like so many people do for your compression, that works totally well. But so I guess that's where it is. And I'll use a dedicated object if I want to do something that's pretty, fun, for lack of a better word. But most of the time, for those of you watching who aren't familiar with me, I'm also very, very nearly blind. So I don't like to use the mouse very much. I mean, obviously you have to, but so I've got this set up with the very wonderful Pro Tools IO search capability. So if I want something to go out, I'm pretty discreet with it. I treat it like a normal bed, where like if I want something to go out the left side, I just click on output, type side, and then it'll bring up a stereo bus, and I just pan it left, and it'll go out the discrete sides. Mine are actually now called near side, mid side, or far side. And so you choose which one you want. It goes ahead and assigns the binaural setting based on the quote unquote mix bus, and it goes discretely out. If you pan it hard left, it goes directly out the left side speaker. So that makes it very, very invisible. I don't actually have to almost ever look at a surround panner unless I'm doing something fun, which does happen, on a lot of stuff. There's one or two fun things per track, but that's the reason I'm not doing the everything's its own object. One of the reasons is just so much. It's so slow to look at the surround panner all the time. And I'm pretty obsessed with efficiency and needing to make. I work a lot with indie bands, and they can't afford for me to spend ridiculous amounts of time on the mix. I need it to be as similar to a dedicated stereo mix as I can. So this is all kind of a blend for now between the needs of my schedule / independent band budgets, and I mean honestly label budgets too, and the possibilities of the technology. Like, I'm totally on board with you, Todd, about dedicated objects probably being the quote unquote best. But
this is the thing that keeps me up at night currently, is because I'm also doing this multiple object bed thing, an object bed per binaural type, and I love it. And I've got a SoundFlow button that I can just choose my channels and hit off, near, mid, far. It does the routing for me. I can do bus processing on these object beds. It's wonderful. I've even got parallel compression going on the object beds. So like old school, kind of like if I need something to have a little more oomph, I've got a little parallel processing. I mean, it's super, super cool, but it does keep me up at night a little bit. Am I going to regret this object bed idea 5 years from now on stuff I printed back in the early 20s? I mean, right? Am I going to wish I'd done all objects? I don't have an answer.
I'm of the opinion that we're all growing with this together. And right now, it's, if you do all objects, well then, like, man, a lot of us spend a lot of time on buses. Like, man, I want a drum bus. I don't have to have a bus on everything. I do, in my routing setup, I do have like 916 buses for, guitars and keys and bass, and like my drum and my drum parallel are surround buses. And so on and so forth. I don't always use them. A lot of times I just assign the track straight out the near, mid, or far mix bus. But I'm of the opinion that, man, we're doing right now. It kind of makes the most sense to live in this middle world, and it's still gonna give content that meets the standards and the expectations of people that are wanting to experience immersive audio. But it just doesn't make sense to do creatively. It doesn't make, not just process wise, but to me creatively, it doesn't make sense to do everything as independent objects.
What about you, Will? How are you? What's your approach here?
So I think the three of us are probably on similar pages here. I know that early on, when I was trying to wrap my head around why the whole sort of Atmos, the Dolby ecosystem worked the way it did, and we were all asking questions about why the bed, and does the bed sound different than the objects, and blah 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 blah, and did these deep dives on differences in sound, and the short answer is there is none. I adopted this idea really early that every time I ran into a problem like this, I would stop and think, what if I was a post-production mixer? Because this was originally designed around the idea that you're mixing movies or television. And
Right.
the thing that I got about the 712 bed was that was a concession to how a lot of movie theaters were wired up speaker wise, that they couldn't count on them having enough overhead speakers. So it made the most sense to mix to 712, and they built a whole ecosystem around that. But that was many years ago, and we're not mixing, the music mixing, we're not worrying about, how our stuff plays back in movie theaters. That's not our audience. So I sort of quickly, early on, Matt will be the first one to say, because we work very much as a partnership. So whatever my approach is also has to be an approach that makes sense to him. And he's less technically inclined than I am. So everything's got to be about sort of simplicity. And at the beginning, we were like, okay, well, if we're going to assign, just same as you, Bobby, if we're going to assign something to the speakers, then we're going to use the bed. Except for the heights, and we're going to have dedicated objects for the height speakers. And then as time went on and Pro Tools advanced and we got these wider buses, maybe, I guess it was a year ago or so, that's when I dove in, because it was simple to use. I dove into the object bed idea and immediately was like, this is better. Now, all of that said, I have the same nightmares that Todd does about what happens in the future, right? Obviously, if you want to future-proof things, having the maximum amount of discrete options is what you want to do. But workflow-wise, it's a nightmare, right? If I have
Yes.
100 tracks in a mix, and I have to think about, and we're used to, in music, treating the overall thing that we're mixing, but I now have to think about how I'm going to adjust my individual track, and then on each individual track, add the overall thing I want to do. It's just, it's throwing sand on my candy, right? I lose my creativity because now all I'm doing is
I like that one. Sand on my candy. Sorry.
I'm still on that as well. No, I hear you. I mean, I've had limited success. Actually, I'll say I've had some success. I've done a couple of records, all objects, and made 128 master faders down the end of my session, and grouped all the plugins together, and it kind of worked. The EQ fine. But I got a little bus compression working that way that worked for the project. It was a pretty open. It didn't require a lot of sort of congeal, and I don't know if I could have gotten there if it was something that, like a rock record, let's say, that was heavily sort of congealed with bus processing. I'm not sure how far I could have gone, but these are the big questions for sort of workflow questions.
Well, also, I mean, dude, plug-in instances. In that case, plug and just, it's just clunky to open up that surround panner every time and drag it. Man, it's just not. It's not fast, and therefore, for me, it takes me out of creative headspace. It puts me in like truly and only engineer headspace, and that's not what mixing is in my brain.
Yeah, and I'm sort of the opposite of you, Bobby, in that I move faster in the 3D panner. I'm obviously a sighted person, so that might make it easier for me than it is for you. But I'm just, which is to say, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. But I 100% agree that whatever your methodology is, the more steps there are to it, and the more you're thinking about the technical implications of it, the worse your mix is going to be.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
you're
find
losing
an
the
approach
plot.
that's intuitive and feels good to you for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for me with the panner thing, like the surround panner is fine, but it is definitely faster for me to click output, press R, and enter. Like
Yeah,
R for rear, and then it pops up rear, and I press enter. That's way faster than anybody, sighted or not, opening 128 or however
true.
many 250 panners, however depending on how many depending on how many tracks you have. You can take a whole group of whatever tracks, hold down Option Shift, and type H for height, and
Right.
so it lets me just not think. I think that's the big thing, is I want to just play, and I don't know that, but
yeah.
the 128 master fader thing, that's a fantastic idea. I thought about that. That's a really good
It does
idea.
work. We got a couple of comments coming in from chats here. Let's try to hit some of these. So someone's asking, I don't know what Fiedler Audio Atmos Composer is. I know there's some alternatives, some things lingering out there that aren't the Dolby renderer, but sort of renderer alternatives that don't make a lick of sense to me. But you guys got any input here? Well,
I
I've
have heard of this, and now I don't know how much they've worked on it since I first checked it out, but the short answer is it's not really a robust solution to it. The idea is that you can use this with a DAW, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a couple of months. You can use this with a DAW that isn't Atmos enabled, like
oh
Ableton.
or Fruity
But
Loops or whatever. Okay, yeah.
yeah, honestly, if you're going to go to the time and expense of trying to implement that with your DAW that doesn't do Atmos, you're better off learning how to use a DAW that does do Atmos.
at least
It's
mixing in one. Yeah.
yeah, it's just not you're it's like you're trying to turn a tank into a sports car. It's just not meant to do what it's being asked to do. Can it do the job? Ultimately, yes, but the amount of effort you're going to put in and the sort of having to pat your head and rub your belly at the same time to make it work to my mind is wasted effort where you could just use a purpose-built tool.
Yeah.
Right.
There's another question here. Hello, I did a project using Atmos. I had to stop as it needed 40 gigabytes and I was not yet finished. What did I do wrong, or is that normal? I'm not totally sure what we're talking about here. Are we talking
I
about?
think
Yeah.
it's file size on the output file. I'm guessing like a large.
Yeah, so
Just because ADM
If you
files
were
are
at
big.
90, let's say you were at 96K and you were doing a mess of 100 objects. I can't do that math, but you could get there. I
I
imagine
was
you could
thinking
get there.
40 gigabytes meant whole record of
Oh, that wouldn't be atypical at all.
yeah, I think the we have to define our terms a little bit. Like if you're trying to record at 96K and play back, listen in Atmos. Well, I don't know what that's completely dependent on how many takes you do and whatever. If you're talking about the ADM file, the deliverable file you're spitting out on the far end, if it's 96K, then yeah, your album absolutely could be 40 gigabytes.
easy one.
Yeah, is it
I
usual?
think you could maybe get there on a song, is the truth. If you had a whole,
yeah.
like I
Sure.
said, 100 objects and 96. Yeah.
Yeah, 100 objects with audio going the whole time, absolutely. But the I guess the thing is it normal? No.
No, mine are.
I don't like that word anymore.
Yeah,
I'm done with normal.
I guess does it happen the majority of the time? I mean, in all the Atmos mixes we've done, the ADM files are generally somewhere between a little less than a gigabyte if it's a short song without very many objects, and maybe 3 to 4 gigabytes for longer songs with more objects.
Yeah,
Same here. Yeah.
Well, let's keep moving here. So, Will, you're quickly becoming sort of like a prominent figure in the world of immersive mixing, and not to overstate it, but you've got your mitts on, like you're sort of pretty cozied up to Dolby, it seems. And I think that we've talked a little about, you've been doing some consulting with auto manufacturers. Like, is there So that's a lot, and that's
Yeah.
awesome. But
Hell yeah, dude.
do you have some clues about when I feel like consumer demand, we're lacking consumer demand, and the real barrier for all of us in really getting our mitts firmly dug into this is that lack of consumer demand's a drag. What's happening with cars? Can you shed some light on when that's going to happen and how and why?
I can only shed a certain amount of light, and I just because I'm it's difficult for me to take praise. I want to be very clear about this.
Take it.
Dolby has invited me a couple of times, and actually, we have a friend named Ryan Ollier that people would know from doing. He worked with Tom Petty for a number of years and has done a
Mhm.
bunch of the Tom Petty. Actually, I think all of the Tom Petty Atmos mixes you might hear out there. Um, I he's done this as well. I got invited to Detroit last December and just did another event in San Francisco in May where I was speaking to various Dolby partners. Obviously, the Detroit one was very automotive focused. The San Francisco one was probably about 50-50 auto and then other partners. And I spoke with a lot of folks about the sort of penetration that Atmos is making in the auto manufacturing sector. And for those, and I'm assuming it's probably a lot of people here that haven't heard Atmos in a car, it is the closest experience I've had to listening in the studio. It's shockingly good, which makes a lot of sense.
I'm very
And
excited about it.
yeah, there's a lot of questions about, well, what happens when you're sitting in the driver's seat? What happens when you're sitting in the back seat? And there are answers to all of those things.
Mhm.
And as with everything in life, none of them are perfect, but they're still pretty cool. Um, the Right now, I think you're seeing it be introduced. It's a, it's a complicated answer, and I'm trying to make it as simple as I can. I think that as consumers, we look at the automotive sector and say, oh, well, an audio system in a car isn't that complicated to upgrade. We've already got a bunch of speakers in there. Why don't they just add Atmos? And the answer is that there's a lot more happening under the hood in those audio systems than we realize. And it's much simpler to implement that technology in electric cars than it is in legacy internal combustion engine cars because of the architecture of how everything is manufactured. So you're seeing it more right now in like Polestar has Atmos available. What's the other Rivian just announced that
Yeah.
they're going to have Atmos available. Mercedes has Atmos available in their upper level cars. GM just announced a car that's going to have Atmos in it, but it's an electric, it's a Cadillac and it's electric. So I think like many things, oh, Lotus has it now, Volvo has announced they're adding it. So it's coming, but the development time on a car is like they start designing these things 10 years before they get released. So we're 3 years since Apple announced spatial audio and kind of fired the starting gun on this.
Yeah.
And that's really early in the development of a car. And you can't take like I don't know, like a Toyota Corolla and say, hey, we're going to put Atmos in next year's model because it requires completely redesigning all the wiring harnesses and the electronics that they're using for the audio system. And these things are pretty complex now. Also, the cars have to be connected, right? They have to have a Wi-Fi or a cellular connection in order to stream the Atmos.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that part of it. Bluetooth won't. You can't have all those channels over Bluetooth, can you? Like
No.
the spec isn't there. God, how do you get the phone? How do you get your phone then to deliver that? How are they doing that?
The short term answer is, and there's a huge push that I saw in the automotive industry that like within 5 years plan on having like a connectivity bill for your car.
Yeah. Well, and
Right.
I
So you'll
suppose
buy a new car and you'll have to get a basically like a cell contract to go along with it.
you'll have a 5G connection from
Yeah.
the computer in the car to a
Yeah.
satellite. Yeah, that's probably more complex than the wiring harnesses is the truth. But I hadn't ever thought of that. Right.
Yeah, but there's a lot of different reasons why they want to do connected cars that are driving that end of things. So I think that's in a way because it's got the sort of the industry wide momentum behind it. and there are a lot of income opportunities there as well. They're driving hard at connected cars.
Someone in the chat saying, what happens if you get in a car crash? I mean, everyone's already distracted enough. I've been rear-ended twice in the last few years by people texting.
Wow.
If someone's turning around wondering if that's really that guitar is really in the back on Dark Side of the Moon, first of all, it is. But yeah, I don't want to get rear-ended a third time here.
Man,
and
that one's a fun one.
I would like to quickly say, and this is a little bit of a side trip, but I see less of it now than I did maybe a year or two ago, but there are a lot of people going, nobody wants to hear sounds coming from behind them. And if you're driving a car and a sound comes from behind you, you're going to turn the wheel and drive off the road. None of that.
Oh, come on. Yeah.
Well, you can turn it off.
Absolutely false.
And you can turn it off or not buy that car. And that goes to my biggest thing of Atmos isn't surround sound. Atmos can be surround sound. So this is for people that care. That's the whole cool thing about this whole format is it's already there. It's already there in one single file. And you choose your own level of involvement. So you've already got the file playing back on your streaming service. So if you care enough to have, a car with an Atmos system or a 14 speaker theater in your home, like the same file is there for everything. And so, yeah, you don't want sounds coming from behind you. Well, then cool. Don't buy that car. We're still going to do the mix. We're still going to do the mix.
Yeah.
And it's
Here's someone else
mix.
in the comments. I got someone else in the comments saying, can I make a nice binaural stereo mix? Binaural stereo mix, okay. And listen to it properly on a stereo hi-fi or PA, even if it's music with pressure in bass area. So, yeah, I mean, let's identify terms. A binaural mix is the output of the renderer that is meant for headphones,
it's
not to be played back on. Yeah, it's not the same as the stereo re-render.
It's a 2-channel binaural mix. It is not a stereo mix.
But as Bobby was saying a second ago, that is kind of like, and we all know that this is sort of the magic of sort of like one of the biggest selling points of Atmos as a format is that you create your single ADM master, and from that it can output a binaural mix for headphones, or it can output a 2.0 mix for your stereo or PA, which you're asking about, or the renderer can intelligently look at the playback system it's got before it and sort of perform the mix in a way to your playback device, and that's what we love about it. So to answer the question, yes. And in terms of bassy music, frequency response wise, the thing's wide open. There's no frequency limitation whatsoever with Dolby Atmos.
I was sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bobby. No, you go.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to say, I think there's so many misconceptions about just people not understanding this format, and I've heard a number of people say that they don't like how Atmos sounds, and my general response is, well, it doesn't have a sound. The mixer is in control of how it sounds. And so you can make it sound like whatever you want. And so there's no, like Todd was saying, there's no limitation frequency response wise. There are some standards put in place about like levels and things like that. But the system is whatever your playback system is. So one single file, the ADM file that the mixer creates will play back in any playback environment, but you should not play a dedicated binaural file out a speaker system. That would sound funny.
Yeah,
and everyone's done it. I've done it. Like when Apple first announced, I went rushing to Apple Music and started playing spatial audio to my speakers. Like, ooh, sounds phasey, and I was instantly like, I actually texted Buddy at Apple like, dude, this sounds. What is this?
Yeah.
To which he responded, well, don't listen to spatial audio through speakers, dummy.
Yeah, the binaural playback is meant to be heard on headphones. If you port it to speakers and go, well, this sounds funny, well, of course it does, because that's not its intended purpose. If you want to listen on 2 speakers, you should be listening to either a stereo version of the mix or the stereo fold down. That's 2 different things.
Also, I will say something that might be important for our viewers to hear, because it comes up a lot for me. It came up 2 days ago and probably 2 days before that, is what headphones should I get to enjoy binaural playback? And it's like, well, any headphones. I mean, it's not. It's yeah. I mean, everybody buys the AirPods and stuff, and that's all fine and dandy. But we can all already enjoy the binaural playback with whatever headphones we have.
Yeah.
You guys have anything to say about that?
I'm
wrong?
I have a lot of artist friends who get upset with the idea that they're being forced into this Atmos situation to sell AirPods, and I can't. There is a push there, and
you're totally right.
And Apple's making an unbelievable amount of money on AirPod sales right now, but that's no one's goal, and that's not why any of us are here.
Yeah, none of us are certainly mixing because we're trying to sell AirPods. I'll do the hopefully quick but deep dive on the headphone situation. If you're listening to currently, at least in the US, there are 3 services that play back Atmos over streaming. It's Amazon and Tidal. Those 2, no matter what headphones you have by any manufacturer of any kind, whether they're Bluetooth or you plug them in or whatever, you're listening to the correct version of the binaural version of the Atmos mix.
And specifically the Dolby binaural render, which is a lot of our favorite.
I'm trying to avoid that just because it gets so complicated.
Yeah.
Apple Music is providing 2 different streams of the binaural version of the Atmos mixes. One of them is for people with Apple headphones, and at this point, if you have anything past the Generation 3 AirPods, or you have AirPods Pro of any kind, or the big ones, the AirPod Maxes, those can do. They have a party trick called head tracking, and a lot of people have tripped over this by accident, but they'll do it in Atmos, which is if you turn your head, the music stays still, and you're now turning your head within this fixed environment.
It's as though you were in a room.
Yeah, so if the vocal is coming from in front of you and you turn your head to the left, now the vocal's coming in your right ear and you're looking straight at whatever was coming from the side. But if you don't have those headphones, you're essentially getting something very similar to the Dolby version. It just stays in place. It behaves the way you're used to. You turn your head and the music goes with you. And that will work with any kind of headphones. So there's absolutely no limitation on what kind of headphones you can use on any of these streaming services.
If you correct me if I actually don't know the answer to this. If you turn head tracking off and just listen in fixed, does it change the file, or are you still hearing the spatial? Because they strip the binaural. Okay, they still strip the binaural metadata, and you're still hearing spatial. Got it.
But only if you're using those specific head-tracked headphones.
Only spatial audio supported headphones. Otherwise, got it.
The other version for people without those headphones actually now includes that for the binaural metadata that we include in the.
That's good. That's process. Good to know. I mean, listening to it, it still sounded like the spatial render, but I didn't know for sure if it switched to the it didn't sound like it was switching to the binaural metadata, but I just wanted to ask that to you guys because
you actually have to switch headphones. That's the thing that
I thought so.
Changes.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nerd Hive.
And Bobby, you were saying earlier, and I think it's interesting to point out that you're of the mind that you just make a mix, and you have the renderer involved and the 2.0 re-render. That's going to be your stereo mix. You're doing it. I've been doing a similar thing, but actually doing a similar thing, meaning doing both the stereo and the Atmos together in one session. But I've done a slightly different thing where I'm just using an AUX for my stereo bus. So I've got the big fader, so to speak, as my Atmos mix with the surround panner. But then my last AUX send is my stereo mix. So I just copy the mix up to that AUX. It's got that command in Pro Tools to copy mix to AUX. And then basically I can just sort of trim, and I put that AUX in trim, and then I can sort of trim up my stereo mix a little bit and not have to sort of find a middle ground so much.
That is a wonderful
idea. And that's yet another idea and a way to work. Will, I don't know that we entirely got to you. Are you using a bed at all? Or you're doing a single object bed? How are you working? I'm not sure we got that.
Pretty similar to you guys. We have 3 object beds, and that's just based on what we decided is best for our workflow.
And are they do they represent binaural metadata, or
and it's all based around how we want to handle our binaural situation. So in the speakers,
Gotcha.
it's all the same. It's all based around. I just didn't want to have to, same as you guys. I don't want to have to go into a plugin.
Nobody wants to fiddle with that.
You can do it even on the channels and Pro Tools now.
Well, that's the question now, right? That's the thing. Now on the Pro Tools fader, you get a little pull down for the binaural metadata, which means that can become a sound flow button, which is going to be pretty exciting. So what's that? God, now I'm in this process of like, am I gonna undo this multiple object bed approach and just maybe do a single object bed, or do objects only, because now it's much easier to switch the binaural metadata? I don't know. This is why we're talking, right?
I don't know what, and this is a thing we all will have to do a deep dive on, and this is part of the exciting aspect of doing this, is we're all constantly having to keep on top of this stuff.
Totally.
The question becomes, does the object bed behave the same way when you change the binaural metadata per track? Can you pan in between it and have it work correctly, working that way? Because that's not the way the renderer behaves. Now, it may.
I'm not following. So you're saying, I see what you're saying. If you do, well, no, if you're doing an object bed, you wouldn't change the binaural metadata per track. Your object beds would. Oh, right. We've done it. Sorry, I just did a full loop. Sorry. You leave it. So you need multiple object beds. You're either doing multiple object beds,
right,
or you're doing everything as an object.
Everything as an object. Yeah. Like, that's the question I have.
But I'm back to, is that the way to work now? Like, I'm really hung up on this.
I would love it if we could assign, like, per track, we assign our binaural metadata, but then feed it all to a single object bed. Oh my God, that's a dream to me.
Where the object bed is render binaural
but
render.
That's not a thing.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't. Yeah. The object bed is its own set of objects, and therefore you can't assign per, like you would assign to those, we're talking about with this routing folder. That's where you would assign your binaural metadata, but everything feeding that doesn't matter what you set it to. And in fact, you won't be able to set it to anything because you're outputting to a bus.
Right.
Wow, that got super nerdy.
We went all the way there. Yes.
Yeah. We just took that dive. Hey guys, but there was like very little splash on that dive. We just man. Guy, that's a really fascinating thing. But having that drop down, I mean, this is only a month old in Pro Tools. In Pro Tools release land, is having that drop down, which is such a cool thing. It precludes the sort of efficiency of the object beds. But I'm interested in exploring that. I'm interested in, going back to the the sort of previous way that sounds like Todd and I were working, which is a single object bed that either left as off or near, and then discrete objects being assigned with that little drop down. We'll call them fun objects being assigned outside of the bed with an all VCA sort of thing at the end of the session.
Yeah, which is similar to how I think, really, to put a bow on the question Todd asked me, I do the same thing. We've got 3 object beds. Everything, really, the only thing that isn't going to the object beds are either, for the most part, it's anything that I'm using the Dolby Music Panner on, that I have, spinning around the room, or doing something, doing something fun like that.
Man.
Otherwise, I'm using the object bed.
Man, I miss that panner in the internal renderer. Holy crap!
And
energy panner, you guys. There's the energy panner.
It's
pretty cool. It's a great plugin. So you can that'll get you spinning through your object bed.
Cool. All right.
It's not time based, so you can't do sort of the Adobe Panner is so good at sort of staying in time with your rhythmic with your session.
Right? I just want to be able to draw it and do some fun stuff. Will you link me to that when we're done?
I'll send you a link. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, what else, you guys? There's not much coming in on chat. We've kind of hit setups and new things and whatever. What's that?
I saw somebody ask if we could share our routing earlier in the chat
here.
Get
into that. Hey, well, here's a question. What's your dream Atmos setup?
Ooh,
I think I have mine.
Yeah, I was gonna say, surprisingly, this is. I can't think of anything I'd rather have than what we have here.
Your Galaxy 32 with an MRC and Cali speakers. Yeah.
The Cali speakers, people might look at that and say, "Oh, but you get better speakers, right?" And the answer is, we've had people come into this studio from their studios with $150,000 worth of speakers and quietly say to us, "I'm not entirely sure that this room doesn't sound better than my room."
I've had the same with not just with the Calis, but just having speakers that are right for your room, having the room set up in a way that sounds good, making sure it's calibrated properly. It's not just an objective. You can have a bad sounding set of $185,000 mains. Like there's no right or wrong. It's whatever's right for you. And if somebody recently said to me about something, it's not the wizard, it's the wand. I'm sorry, it's not the wand, it's the wizard.
Yeah.
And
or it's not the arrow, it's the archer.
It's
Right.
not the tool, it's the carpenter. We got them all.
Wow. And also, I'm really still liking the sand on my candy thing. That was cool. But dude, I have the same thought as you, Will. These Calis sound great, and they just right for the size room and the setup. It's not just this is not just an unabashed Cali endorsement. I didn't get a hookup at all, but I don't know. My dream setup is I have in Studio A, I have a Galaxy 64 with an MRC because it's a tracking room as well. You guys can probably see I have a big old SSL, and this is not. I actually said a lot about this in that that YouTube thing that Antelope and Vintage King did last year, which is my studio is a recording studio, and it happens to be an Atmos room as well. It's not just a dedicated mix room, though I do mix more than anything else, and this is my control room. So Galaxy 64 with MRC is great. As I said before, I own a speaker company, so the hurdle that I'm trying to get to with my growing little baby company is to have my own speakers that I designed in this room. So that's the only change for me. I really love the I/O and the MRC and the workflow and all that. I just need to get a bunch more of my own speakers in here. Yeah. What about you, Todd? Your speakers are pretty psychotically badass.
I've got these crazy hi-fi speakers from this company from Utah called Wilson Audio, and they make ridiculously expensive, speakers for audiophiles. But there was a speaker they made. They're actually remaking it now again. But there's a speaker called the Watt Puppy that was sort of a standard in hi-fi communities, particularly like in the mid '90s, I think. So audiophiles tend to sort of move on from things and like to sort of re-spend that money, I feel like. And you can sometimes find these older Watt Puppies. I've been lucky enough to find these used Watt Puppies lingering around for for a relatively affordable price, and I love them. They image like crazy. They've got a Focal driver as a Focal tweeter that I really like, and Dyne Audio drivers, and the rest of the drivers are Dyne Audios. They're incredible though. A crazy crossover. They weigh about 100 pounds a piece, so they're really stable and buckled down, and they make an amazing image. I love them.
That's awesome.
But yeah, and a Galaxy, same as you got Galaxy series with an MRC driving the whole thing. So probably for the cost that I could have spent 10 grand on the Grace controller alone, but I took that same 10 grand and sort of bought the whole shebang. But by going Antelope and used speakers.
And I'll say, I don't know about you guys, but my first Atmos setup in this room was not Antelope. I had this is an HDX room, and so I had two Apogee Symphony Mark IIs for 64 I/O for recording. I had the two, and they were HDX. And I know technically they say they support Atmos with the USB monitor controller, but it does not allow for time alignment. It does not do a lot of stuff. Same with
No
like
B chain.
Yeah,
So
so that's not a solution. That's just putting an Atmos sticker
it's a volume.
on
It's a volume
you know.
knob, and I feel most manufacturers that say they support Atmos, if the interface itself isn't using its own DSP, it's not going to be able to do time alignment or EQ or any of that stuff. So I was not that sorry, I didn't finish my thought. The two Apogee Symphony Mark IIs were just my recording IO and like my mixing IO and stuff. My monitor controller and my Atmos controller was a Matrix Studio with the mom controller, and that was a really great system. It worked really well. I did not use that as for recording and it was just basically a monitor controller. I didn't really use any of the inputs. I did use Dante and all that. And it's a really, really delightful unit. That being said, the Dadman user interface is a bit clunky, and just the Antelope stuff is just superior. There's a lot more options. It's a lot more flexible. It's way easier to switch between certain setups. And it frankly, it's just nicer to look at. Like it's more fun. And so I'm very, very happy with that setup.
I got to help out a little bit in sort of developing this Atmos ecosystem for Antelope, and I'm super proud of what we pulled off. I was literally looking. Well, I was literally looking at putting together my room and looking at that $10,000 Grace, and I didn't have to think very long before I started sending emails to my Bulgarian buddies. We've got some comments showing up here, so let's see what we got. How do you target the consumer market with Atmos mastering? How do you target the consumer market with Atmos mastering the product? Is there growing demand for consumers to buy and play it, or is it strictly limited to special entertainment venues? Ooh. So we kind of that is a question. Consumer demand is sort of we're kind of in I wouldn't call it a pickle, but certainly more consumer demand is going to drive this boat forward. What's the answer to that? How do you target the consumer market with Atmos?
May I speak on that? Maybe I think I might understand something. I might be able to give an answer that's indirect. It goes back to the thing I've been preaching, which is that Atmos is not surround sound, but it can be surround sound. So consumer demand is important, but also our DSPs, Apple, for example, now you can't be on an Apple curated playlist unless you have a spatial mix. And so I'm doing it independently of consumer demand. I want my artists to have as much reach as possible. I want the artists to be able to be on all of the playlists, and I don't want to tie their hands and have somebody go, well, you can't be on this because you don't have a spatial mix. And I also don't want them to then take a stereo mix that I do or someone else does and then go give the stems to somebody for $50 with a set of AirPods and do some terrible sounding Atmos mix. And so
there's undoubtedly some of that going on. Yeah.
There's a lot of that going on. That's where the other comment I made earlier about people thinking Atmos sounds bad. Atmos does not sound bad. The person that did the mix did a bad job. If it sounds bad, it's not the format's fault. It means it was probably an afterthought. And so, but that is affected by consumer demand, is how much do you care about it? And so that's where my whole thing about just doing one mix to try and still stay within someone's budget. It's a happy medium of everything, but the consumer demand is really important, like long term, for this format to grow. But I don't think it necessarily needs to be a deciding factor of whether or not you do it.
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
So the first thing about the question, it being only for big venues, it was never about big venues. So that you can set that to one side. This is all about the whole purpose of this format is for individual listening. It will work and has been used in large venues that have immersive setups, but that was not the initial push. In terms of the consumer adoption, I think a couple of things. I think number one, we're all in a rush to have everything be an immediate success the moment it's introduced. And everyone kind of went, Atmos. Why is everybody not jumping on this immediately
Right.
in like 2021 or 2020? And the answer is because all of the products that people are going to buy have to be developed over time, and we've got to figure out how do we scale this in such a way? Because if Dolby absolutely learned from the debacle that was trying to push 5.1 in
I
music.
remember those
That
years. Yeah,
system
I remember.
that system didn't scale, required you to listen on 5 speakers, and at a time before streaming, required people with money, who were the only people who could afford this, rebuy a catalog of music in physical form that they had
On
probably purchased
DVDs.
once on vinyl, once on cassette, again on CDs, and now they were being asked to do another CD. To say nothing of the fact that you had to set aside a room in your house to do this and then put speakers in a very specific place. Like, we all know that's going to be a disaster. Nobody's going to do that. And if we want people to listen to Atmos in speaker form in their home, it's not going to be a setup like what we've got in our studio. Now, that said, that brings us to the first point, which is, oh, well, if you're not going to do that kind of setup at home, well, what's the point? Well, also, nobody listens to your stereo mix on a set of $10,000 speakers perfectly set up and tuned in their living room.
I talk about this all the time, man.
Yeah,
thank you.
but
You're a
It's
sage,
a world
dude.
of Bluetooth speak. We're in the world of Bluetooth speakers, right?
But
Yeah.
we're not doing mixes on Amazon Echo Dots, right? So the idea that the studio experience has to be equivalent to the home experience is just, it's been false with stereo mixes, it's false with Atmos. It's just a different translation. And now we're starting to see one of the big solutions for speaker playback is soundbars that have, like 11 drivers in them and are reflecting sound off the walls. And people are reacting to that and they think it sounds cool. Sonos in particular has an expandable system. You buy the soundbar,
The
you
arc,
like that?
right?
Well, I would like it to be, you want it to be more immersive? Well, buy a couple of their satellite speakers and put them in the back and they connect wirelessly. So you're not running cables all over the room. Like, these solutions are coming online, but the idea that this was going to be an instant, immediate success, it just was never going to happen. Stereo, the first stereo vinyl was cut in 1957. And at the time, there were 2 different methods of cutting vinyl for stereo. So they first had to figure out which one of those is going to win. And that took a couple of years. Nobody listened to music in stereo for a good 3 to 4 years after that. Then it was a niche thing. It wasn't until the late 60s that vinyl really became that stereo really became the more dominant format over mono. And record companies didn't stop pressing mono vinyl until 1973. The BBC didn't stop broadcasting in mono until the early 1990s. So that's
What?
30 years.
Wow.
30 years to go completely from mono to stereo. So the idea that 3 years is somehow a long period of time for this to grab on, no, it's going to take longer than that.
Thank
That's
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. Yes.
And we have to keep, because I know we've all had this experience. Whenever one of us has somebody who's never heard Atmos before sit in their studio and you play something for them and it's their first experience, I cannot tell you the number of times, it's almost everybody, and it just happened 2 days ago here. They'll hear their first playback, they turn and look at me and go, how am I supposed to listen to something in stereo ever again? After hearing that. And then that experience informs their headphone experience because they know what the headphone experience is trying to do. So now they're listening on headphones and going, holy cow, Atmos sounds great on headphones. Obviously, to Bobby's point, when they hear a good mix of it.
Yeah.
So all of these things are going to take time. We need to get into the consciousness of people and let them experience this. And we have to keep proving to them, listen to what we can do with this format when creative people who understand it with the technical skills push it to the limits and give you the creativity you can get out of it. Sorry, that was a
very,
long rant.
no, that's very,
great.
that's all very, very well said. Yeah.
I have a short addition to that, which is you made the comment about, well, we're not mixing. It's like the NS10 speaker thing. We're not mixing on an Amazon Echo Dot. We are mixing something's kind of always been. I'm not a big NS10 guy, but I've always thought about mixing as mixing for the highest common denominator, but also understanding the lowest. And so, like, I want to be able to mix for somebody that does have $100,000 set of hi-fi speakers and have it sound as great as possible. I want to be able to mix an Atmos mix for a person that does have a 916 set up in their multi-million-dollar home theater. Like, it needs to sound good for them. We're mixing for the highest common denominator, but again, it all goes back to Atmos is not surround sound, but it can be. So it's everything. So it doesn't matter if you guys are, you guys being consumers, if consumers are all listening on 916 all the time. Like, it is supposed to be just as good on, it's supposed to not just as good. It's still supposed to be really good in stereo in your old car or in binaural in headphones or on your 11 speaker sound bar, or like the whole point of it is that it is everything.
It's translation. It's in the same way the whole NS10 trick was, and it was, as far as I know, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, it was a Bob Clearmountain thing. Bob Clearmountain was like, if I know if I can make it sound good on these, it'll sound good on a consumer system. Okay, well, that's one kind of translation, and over the years we all came to accept, all right, well, it's got to sound good on the radio when radio is what we had to worry about. It's got to sound good on a crappy transistor radio speaker. Now it's got to sound good on a Bluetooth speaker, or somebody's, they need to be able to hear everything they want to hear out of their phone speaker. But every one of those involves making a compromise to every other mix. And we have decades and decades and decades of experience in making those translations work in stereo. And to the point that we've kind of forgotten how very good we are at creating music mixes in stereo. And now this, making the Atmos translation, does my 916 mix sound good in 5.1? Does it sound good on binaural? That's a new kind of translation matrix that we have to grapple with.
Yes.
And it means kind of having to throw out everything you knew about the stereo thing and relearn it in a different way, and understand that something as simple as, but stereo headphones sound the same as stereo speakers. They absolutely do not. But decades and decades of training have made people think that they do. And now they hear that the training is just listening. People listen on speakers and then they put on headphones, and all they, everybody just draws an equivalence between those two when there really isn't one. Now they go, they do this magical translation in their head that is automatic because everybody's been doing it for 60 years. But now they look around a room and see 15 speakers and then put on headphones and go, well, this is completely different, as if it wasn't completely different before.
Yeah,
and it's just a new.
That's very good stuff. Yeah, we've got a lot of comments stacking up here, you guys. We probably should try to get to some of these real quick. No, do not be quiet. But
I'm starting a band called Translation Matrix. Nobody else steal that,
okay? It's pretty good. So let's see. Let me scroll up here. We got a few things. So there's a question. We hit that one. So can the MRC be at a distance from the Galaxy 32, or is it limited to a 5mm USB cable? I'll just handle that real quick. The MRC doesn't connect to the Galaxy itself. It connects to your computer USB. So through a use of powered hubs and whatever, you can extend it like any USB device from your computer.
You can even do USB over. You can use a USB over Ethernet controller. Like my USB run is over 25 feet. Just it goes right there, but it has to go back behind my console. Blah blah blah.
Yeah. Do you like Cubase 13 Pro Atmos mixing? What's your favorite DAWs? We're all Pro Tools users just because. I don't have anything bad to say about Cubase. I just don't know, honestly.
Yeah, we've got a good friend in Chicago who mixes in Logic and likes a lot of things about that, but does ultimately end up usually either going through the render or doing some work in Pro Tools, just because he has access to more
I
stuff
think without
there.
a doubt, Avid has got the best internal renderer hands down at the moment. But these things, like the point of a lot of what we're saying is these things are changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
Who knows, right?
And
But
if you know how to use Cubase and you can get a good result out of it,
Yeah.
great. Keep
Yeah.
using Cubase.
Yeah, you use what you use the tool that you can create the best with,
Yeah.
right? Simple stuff.
It's not the wand, it's the wizard.
Here we go. Oh, let's do a round of it. Okay, so I have in my studio a Galaxy 32 and the Atmos i8s. They are amazing. Thanks for creating these amazing products, Antelope. Oh,
Beautiful.
very nice.
Awesome.
I agree. Will there be Atmos in clubs?
Oh.
So there's a guy, I forget the guy's name. There's a guy at Dolby that helped me in my onboarding process that
he's gone now.
I wish I could remember. Okay.
But Luke Argilla.
Yeah. So he was working on that. I think there was one or two clubs in San Francisco a couple years ago. They were sort of doing Dolby installs, and I don't know.
Goes back further.
They're trying.
They did. Yeah. So the first Atmos mix specifically done for music was Elton John's Rocket Man. It was done around 2016, I believe. And as soon as Dolby said, we like this idea of doing Atmos for music, one of the things they tried to do was this. They were interested in putting Atmos in clubs. Mm-hmm. I think they got a little too far out over their skis in terms of the concept behind it. What they decided to do was do these Atmos mixes that they were then going to hand to DJs who would be able to pick them apart. So, like, it's almost like having access to the multi-track.
Don't love that. Don't love anything about this. Okay, no one's going to like anything about this, right?
Like, oh, what if we want to have them spin this object around the room? And that's not the way it was originally mixed, and whatever. And it, as you can see from Todd's reaction, it didn't really go over very well. They paid to have Atmos installed in one club in San Francisco, one in Chicago, and one in London, and it didn't take off. And then the pandemic hit and all the clubs shut down and Dolby just shuttered the whole thing. My viewpoint on that is they were basically trying to say, hey, nobody's ever heard a record before. Let's get a DJ to scratch a record. Like, nobody had any context for what they were hearing. So how can they possibly understand why it's any good? They really needed to just have people put together playlists of Atmos mixes as they existed and play them back, was my feeling. So the club thing, I it's all cost benefit for clubs, obviously, and they're there to sell alcohol. So anything that's going to push more, get people to buy more of their stuff, they're going to do.
The obvious problem with Atmos mix being, though, depending on where you are in the club, if you're over by the right speaker, you're going to be hearing a lot of front right. I don't know. Everybody's going to be huddled in the middle of the club. It seems a little far out, but
I was thinking about, this is like you guys said earlier about it being predominantly intended to be a personal experience. Like, I kind of am interested in the binaural version of go to a live performance and everybody's silent disco style.
Oh, that's a killer idea.
I think head tracking could be fun as hell if it could live render, and so that could be. Then you're not stuck hearing whatever's coming out the front or the right side. That's why stereo imaging isn't as drastic live anyway, even in stereo. Yeah. But I think the live performance aspect of Atmos is far more interesting than the playback of what we're talking about. I think like performance club is bands having fun shit. Like, can you imagine seeing Tame Impala or somebody with a really fun going to the Sphere? We're also experiencing stuff like that now. People starting to do things like that.
And I think that just like they're in a club, they may purposely have they have stereo systems, but they may be they're putting some right information on the left side, left and the right side for exactly this reason. You could do the same thing. They're doing it in cars, where you have some of the left side, right side speaker information, the left side speaker. Like, there's a way to sort of make that work. That's a technical challenge that can be overcome.
There's some more questions here. To listen to Apple Music in Atmos on a Galaxy 32, do I need to install Loopback? Any of us could take it? Somebody want to take it?
I use Omnibus. It
Yeah,
needs to.
so the trick is it's got to be a 16 channel, to trick Apple Music into doing the render.
Yes.
It's got to see a precisely 16 channel core audio device. So however you do that, you could get a 16 channel audio device. You can use loopback. You can use, what was the one you mentioned? The audio
I
movers
use
one?
audio. Sorry, Omnibus. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Whatever. So you
Yeah, and
set it
we're
to 16
using
channels, makes it work.
we're actually doing our Apple Music playback off of our Apple Spatial laptop here. We're using Dante Virtual Sound Card as
Yeah,
Also,
a
it's 16 channel
interface.
mode.
Yeah,
I've got a weird one
I
for you guys though. This Galaxy 64 just works. So it breaks the rule. It's a 64 channel device, but for some reason it just works. I
Todd,
don't know why.
mine does not. What
Really?
we talked about that at your place a few weeks ago.
That's weird.
I flew back to Nashville. First
Yeah.
thing I tried, my Galaxy 64 with current software does not, and I have a M2 Mac computer, and whatever I can't remember the OS. It's not Sonoma, so maybe it's Sonoma.
Maybe I'm on the newest OS, so maybe.
I'm not. I'm on Ventura or whatever. I'm not on Sonoma. So that was my thought. I came back and tried it with my Galaxy 64 because that, like, Omnibus is
Didn't
great.
work.
It does have a little bit of a sound, and it takes a second to like lock up. I think all of them kind of take a second to go, oh, 16 channels. Okay, here you go. And yours does not, which was something I was super excited about.
Omnibus, I hear you. I've sort of come to the conclusion that it's not so much that it has a sound, but it's that core audio sample rate conversion sound. That if your core audio sample rate set to 96 or 44 or something, and it's real time, there's always that real time sample rate conversion happening in core audio. If you've got different sample rates, and that I tend to hear and go crazy about, but whatever.
I still have fun with it. I still enjoy Omnibus. But yeah, I'm gonna maybe upgrade to Sonoma and try that because that's fascinating to think about.
I don't know why it works, but it does. Let's keep going. Okay, so Delta Records. Okay. This person's using Ginger Audio Sphere. I don't know if you guys have used that. That's a software-based controller that you can use, and it's totally cool. Totally
I've heard
works.
good things.
Yeah,
I know a few people using it with like UA interfaces and stuff, and it seems to totally work fine. What do you think about the upload on the distributor platform costs extra money for each Atmos file project? I mean, look, everybody's got their hand out. Always, right? Any service costs. I don't know.
And it's a cash grab for so many people.
Yeah.
It is, but I normally I'm the first person to go, these companies are greedy bastards. But I will say you do have to keep in mind that there is server space involved here.
They're providing a service. I mean, it's a service.
Yeah, I think that they're overcharging for it for sure, but I'm not surprised that there's an additional fee because it's outside of their original fee structure.
And it is still it's still kind of a new Wild West. I'm sure it does require additional management. But yeah.
Here's another one. Unreal Game Engine now has a spatial renderer for Atmos for game development and movie production. I did not know that. That's really, really, really cool news.
Oh man, yeah.
So that means because I was just talking to somebody who was mixing a score for a game, and I assume that it was Atmos, and they said that it was not. But that will be changing soon, and that'll be a welcome change, I think, for those of us working in strange medias like gaming. Is the Sphere immersive? I don't know.
I can take that.
Yeah. Have you been to the Sphere?
I haven't, but I know the people who built the sound system for the Sphere.
Oh, goodness.
So the answer is both yes and no. The sound system in there is unbelievably flexible and can be ported to do specific immersive playbacks. I don't believe they have yet. It's not that they haven't figured out how to do it. They just haven't come to an agreement of how to do it with Dolby, specifically for Atmos. That's number one. Number two, Dolby has an Atmos-enabled theater at the MGM Hotel in Vegas as well. But the amazing thing about the speaker system at Sphere, and also there's a similar one at the Beacon Theater in New York City, is it uses something called waveguide synthesis technology, where they can basically beam multiple versions of whatever kind of mix they're doing to specific sections, which is
I've
how
read about this and it blows my mind.
Same.
I heard a demonstration of this. For those who don't know, here in Los Angeles, right in Burbank, right across from the Burbank airport, there's this weird gray geodesic dome. That's the R&D center for Sphere, and they have sort of a mini setup of both the video and the audio in there. And I went over there to hear a demo, and I turned to my friend who worked for the company. It's called Holoplot, and I said, "This is voodoo. I don't. How can you do this? It's amazing." So yeah, and everybody who's been to the Sphere says it is incredible how they're able to do this. All this to say, it's a long answer for it can be immersive in the sense of what we're talking about with Atmos and being able to move things in 3 dimensions and all that. It's all about implementation. The tech is there. It's just how they choose to do it for each show.
I would love to talk with you about a little bit more about that at some point, Will. That is so fascinating to me. That whole system. We don't have time right now, but
let's hook up a field trip out there, Will. Come on.
Oh, come on. Let me get on a plane.
Let's go.
I'll fly into Burbank. Can one of y'all pick me up?
Let's keep going there. So Peter's saying, I agree with the statement that not only the Atmos format is important, but also that what we listen to should be a great Atmos mix. Yeah, right. So which Atmos recordings are your favorites in terms of sound? I like this question a lot. I'm going to do top 3s. You ready?
Yeah.
I'm going to go first just because I feel like I can. So it's hard to mess with Rocket Man, of course. It's the perfect song. It's the perfect mix. It's just right. It's just made for it. But Ryan Uliet, who was mentioned earlier, I think by Will, I'm in love with "Don't Come Around Here No More."
Me too.
It's near the top of my list at the moment. What's another good one? I'll just go Fleetwood Mac. I think that whole Rumors record was done very well. You could argue that maybe the LFE is a little juiced, but I'm not going to argue that. I think it's really well done. Really, really tastefully mixed. Especially, you got a lot of background vocals and things to work with that come from sort of all around the room, and it's just really well done. Those are my 3. What else? What do you guys got?
I will add to that. It's not, and I'm not, when I talk about what my favorite Atmos mixes are, they're not the ones that necessarily have the most stuff flying all over the room. It's the ones that make the music connect with me the most.
Yeah.
The new Olivia Rodrigo record, I thought was really tastefully done in Atmos. It really revealed a lot of stuff about that record to me that I didn't hear in the stereo. And I think that's like modern pop, especially because of the amount of absolute destruction that is done to that kind of music to make it as loud as it needs to be to compete in the marketplace. As soon as you take that to Atmos and open up all of the layers of stuff that you can't hear in the stereo because it's all so squeezed together, and then take away that the distortion, holy cow, it was like, wow, it was like listening to a completely different record for me.
Wow.
I will that's awesome. I will check that out. I actually haven't heard Rumors yet, but I'm a huge fan of that record. I just haven't. That's awesome. I'm going to listen to that ASAP. I definitely echo Rocket Man and Don't Come Around Here No More. But also there's a Snarky Puppy record.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know the guy. I looked him up. I'd love to be his friend because he is wielding the power quite well. It's a phenomenal sounding.
Is this the live record? Is this the live record?
Let me see if I can find it here.
Okay. I heard something at Avid the other day. They had a live record in their little demo room at Avid here in LA.
It's I'm going slow. I'll find it in a sec. But it's that band. I mean, musically speaking, I'm hot and cold a little, but wow, that mix is absolutely fantastic.
Cool.
So I gotta find it, but I'm slow on the
before I forget too, our friend Dave Way I think he did the stereo and the Atmos of the new Bad Plus record. That is gorgeous.
I'll have to check that out. Huh.
Yeah, really, really good.
Dave's been doing this as long as anybody, right? I think he's he's truly one of the early masters of all this. Yeah.
sort of post the only people that were doing it were at Capitol or Abbey Road, but
Yeah.
pre the rest of us jumping in.
Totally. I mean, I got in when Apple announced that was my
us
go
too.
switch. I was like, okay, here we
Yeah.
go. A great venue for Atmos is also in cars. Almost everyone has one. I couldn't agree anymore. You can predict where everyone's head's going to be, all that good stuff. Interesting finding. Music in Atmos is a personal home experience. Movies in Atmos is mostly a theatrical experience. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to make of all that. I like the idea of a large format musical experience. I've never had that. I like the idea of it. Like I remember as a kid, remember like what were those shows? There'd be like pink, like The Wall.
Yeah.
What were those? What was that called? There was that
the planetarium.
Yes, like planetarium shows. I love that idea, and I like the idea. If they could work out a sphere or like some sort of large, some way to present Atmos effectively in a big space. I really love that idea.
So two things about that.
Yeah.
We've been lucky enough, Matt and I've been lucky enough a number of times to hear our stuff played back in movie theaters with Atmos.
In these Dolby rooms, right? Yeah.
In an Atmos movie theater.
Mm-hmm.
The first time we did it was we mixed the latest Dave Matthews Band record in Atmos, and then they did a premiere event at Dolby at the screening room here in Hollywood. And they invited a bunch of Dave Matthews fans to come down and listen, and people were blown away by that. So even, depending, the mix absolutely changed depending on where you were sitting.
I feel like I'd use a lot of center channel. I mean, I'm gonna really think about that center channel a lot more for a theater.
Oh, and it definitely made me think about it a lot too. But it made me think, in the end, a lot of us are really nerds about, like, we think about this stuff as engineers way more than the people listening do. And as long as they have an experience that connects with them, awesome. There's also, I know someone right now who's trying to work with a couple of partners to do, obviously movie theaters are having a tough time right now. So they're looking at, what if we did in these, because there's, I think all the whole AMC chain has at least one Atmos theater in each of their locations, and they're like, what about on Monday and Tuesday if we do Atmos music playbacks and people pay a really cheap cost for it, but you can come in and have this music experience. So it's being looked at in a number of ways to kind of have that larger format experience.
In my town, there's a theater, and this is becoming kind of widespread. I think the theater's just trying to get people in, but a lot of theaters serving drinks and food now. So that'd be awesome. I'm there. I'll be there as soon as it exists.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So, folks watching this are fans of, hearing immersive in a bigger space and having kind of a communal listening experience. Keep an eye out for that.
Nice. Someone's mentioning in the chat, Deadmau5 creates his concerts in Unreal Game Engine to sync visual effects, lighting, pyro, etc.
Cool.
Using the Atmos plugin. That guy is just on top of it's doing it. I'll look into that. What about the Galaxy and newer Orion models allowing for Atmos that excludes the Orion Studio Synergy Core, for example? Antelope Stasis device numbers here not compatible. Yeah, okay, so this is specific Antelope talk. I've got you on this. The problem with the Orion Studio, if I'm not mistaken, and I've got one here, I don't think you have enough outputs on it. You've got a D sub, you've got an 8-channel D sub on the back. And then some reamp outputs. So you could, we've thought about this. You could maybe do 714, but you'd end up using the reamp outputs as your height speakers, which is the wrong impedance for your input to your speakers or amplifiers. It's just simply not the right device. I don't think anybody's gatekeeping or like dumbing down devices. It's just the wrong device for Atmos. Simply.
And on that topic, Todd, it's probably important to say, and this is the kind of the 30,000 foot view of what you're saying, there aren't too many specs in terms of what you have to have in order to mix in Atmos. There's not a specific size room. You don't have to put your speakers in exactly the same place. There's play in
it's kind of forgiving
that stuff. It's a very forgiving thing. The one thing that is a must do though is if you want to mix in Atmos, your minimum setup is 7.1.4.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the interface, if there aren't a solid, what is that,
you need 12 outputs. Yeah,
then you just can't do it.
It's a no-go. Yeah,
It's so funny touching back earlier with the bed in Pro Tools still being 712 when the minimum speaker setup 714.
714, right? And
Yeah.
it's all post-production
and
related.
it's just created such a it just creates all these things we're talking about today of ways of working and stuff. It really, if it was just simply an expandable bed, a configurable bed, we wouldn't be talking about all this. So,
right.
Someone asked, I've always wondered how Atmos changes your mix down on a 24 plus track mixing desk. Do you build submixes for each target Atmos channel, or is it all in the box? So, Clear Mountain's mixing on a console. Are you doing any Atmos on that console of yours, or are you doing all your routing in Pro Tools, Bobby?
Are you asking me? I can't see. Does Will have a console? Oh, I can't. Sorry.
No, we're completely in the box here.
I've done a few. Vance Powell, same. He has the same console. It's an SSL 6000. I've done a 5-1 bed on the desk using faders for left, right, using the stereo aux for. I believe I was using it for rears, and then there's 4 mono auxes, and so it could be sides, center, and LFE. So you can do a 5-1 bed on a desk, but most desks don't have more available routing than that. This is, some of them might have 10 auxes, but generally speaking, no, it's more trouble than it's worth. The way I approach it is if I have a track that I really want, some of the sound of the old SSL goo on, for lack of a better word, is I'll hardware loop the channels, and I'll just use the EQ and dynamics and put my outboard gear in inserts, but I'm doing all my faders and panning in the box. Occasionally I'll do LR on the desk or something. Very, very rarely. Mostly it's just everybody's mixing in the box these days anyway. Mixing on a desk is going away so fast, but and it has been for a long time. But Atmos, it's like, man, it just way makes more sense to do at least the balance and the panning and stuff in the box, or it's really complicated and really slow to do it on the desk.
That sounds very, very sane.
Yeah. Can I jump in on that one real quick too?
Yep.
Yeah.
A slightly different angle on it from what Bobby's saying. I agree 100% with everything that he said. My take on it, because I'm a big fan of analog gear, but Matt and I decided to go completely in the box for all of this, was that I very quickly saw this is just a digitally native format. The idea that you're going to try to band-aid something to keep using a 24-track console, but the amount of complication and the amount of limitation you're going to have is absolutely not worth any of what you think you're gaining sonically. And then very quickly, some of our early gigs were doing having to recreate these catalog mixes of famous songs that were done completely in analog on tape. And we were able to do it completely in the box, to the degree that we had huge fans and artists and management and everybody come in and listen to it. We actually just had one of our first mixes was the B-52's Love Shack. Last week, Don Was, who produced the song, heard it in the studio for the first time in an Atmos room. And he immediately called us and said, that sounds great. That's got all the vibe and everything that the original had, completely in the box.
Nice. Yeah, the emulations are fully there.
Yeah, and you're tying one hand behind your back, trying to use analog equipment to work in a digitally native environment.
Yeah.
I mean, mixing on a desk is super great, but if you can't make a great sounding mix without mixing on a console, it's not the console's fault.
Yes.
So Atmos is just, you're not really gaining enough, like you said, not really gaining enough sonically to make it worth the effort. And this is somebody sitting at my, classic, amazing sounding analog desk. It's not worth it.
Yeah. There's a question here about, is it possible to import calibration profile into the Galaxy 32 from SonarWorks? So Let's not get into the whole thing about SonarWorks and all that. Let's assume that. Well, the short answer is it's not It's not automatic. From SonarWorks, you can output a text file that shows all of your bands and cue points and things, and you have to manually enter them into the Galaxy 32. There's an argument floating around that I think if you have an opportunity to have someone come and tune your room, with their ears and smart, that's probably you're probably gonna come out with a better situation. But SonarWorks has its place. The answer is kind of. You can get that into it, but you're going to have to do it manually.
I had it described to me as SonarWorks will give you an output that's a painting of the thing that you're looking at, and having somebody come in and tune the room is more like a photograph. So you can definitely get started and work your way around with SonarWorks, but if you really want to nail things down, having a person come in and do it is still a better option.
We've all been lucky enough, I think, the three of us to have Dolby. We've all got Dolby tuned rooms, and when you hang out with those guys,
really?
Well, when you hang out with those guys, you kind of learn pretty quickly that the goal is not a straight line. Like a straight line sounds pretty dumb, is the truth. And there's sort of there's just some feel. There's some feel and some finesse to it. And every room is different, and you're going to see where the mode is, and you're going to sort of, if you try to make the mode of the room a straight line, you incur so much, timing problems and stuff that there's a lot of nuance to tuning a room, and SonarWorks can't impart nuance maybe yet, but here we are. Let's keep going. Is it already possible to input? Oh, sorry. Okay, people kind of just being genuinely positive about Antelope, which is fantastic. This one's in Spanish. Anybody know Spanish? Okay. I like the silent dance party idea. but what would be really cool is if the spatial audio is tied to visual elements and augmented reality glasses. Oh, fuck yeah. This is very doable, but still a stretch for consumers. I mean, look, that's all coming. I know that the three of us are all here for all of it. I'm so excited about, the bottom line of the whole conversation is that there's so much excitement about what's coming. And
we're just kind of dipping our toes in this, even where we are now. Maybe our foot's in.
Yeah.
Maybe a foot,
right.
maybe up. Maybe
like
some
a big
of us
toe.
maybe some of us are up to the knee, but not me. And like this
is
if like.
We're sorry. Finish. I'm sorry.
I just gonna say this whole thing exists for that eventual future. Like we are going. That is where we are going, and merely I am just trying to stay on top of things so that I, like, as complicated as it is now, I find it much more useful to learn along the way.
For sure.
So,
and we're all doing that. We're all just trying to figure it out.
If we're on the stereo timeline, we're at about 1960. So those crazy Beatles stereo mixes that everybody, laughs about now, those haven't even happened yet. Like we don't even understand how bad the mistakes we're making right now are going to be perceived from the future, and we're all going to be looking back going, "Whew,
oh God!"
Wow, I would have done that totally differently if I understood what I understood today.
And for what it's worth, even on those Beatles stereo mixes, they only had one speaker in the control room, so they were just guessing.
Yes.
Too. And so.
Which might be, there's some of that happening today with Atmos, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
There's some kids huddled away in certain offices with some headphones doing some guessing. Oh, yeah. Well. But let's not get all that. Well, look, we're coming up on 2 hours here. I feel like we should probably wrap this up. This has been super cool. Anything you guys want to add? Any points you wanted to make that we didn't get to? How do you guys good?
We should do it again. We should do it again because I want to talk about how everyone's using LFE and center and things like that.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, we could really, there's no end to stuff to talk about with this, right? And,
right.
Yeah. How does everyone get in touch with you guys? What's the best way? I think we called out your websites at the beginning. WillKennedyProducer.net or .com, sorry.
.com, yeah.
And BobbyHolland.net, is it?
Yes, Instagram, Bobby_Holland. Feel free to message me.
I'm at WK Producer on Instagram.
I'm going to follow you right now.
I think it's worth saying that, I know that the three of us are pretty keen on sort of giving back to younger creators and stuff. Particularly, Atmos can feel like there's a big learning curve there, and it can feel like there's maybe some extra barrier to entry and whatever. But, I know that the three of us are like-minded in this way, that if anyone interested in getting involved in this, would reach out and needs a hand, needs some advice, whatever, you can get in touch with any of us, and I guarantee you'll get an email back. So don't ever not reach out, you young creators out there, because a lot of us older guys have been at this a while, and we are definitely interested in giving a hand up. There's less commercial studios in the world. There's less opportunities to give a hand up. We are all here for younger people, though.
That is the first time I've ever been called an older guy. So cheers.
Well, it should. I think I've got a couple years on probably both of you. Maybe we'll call the older guy and I don't know what to call it. But
I don't think you're an older guy, Todd. I think age is but a state of mind, my friend.
Let's lead with that. Yeah. But all right. Well, look, I appreciate you guys coming on, putting in the time. We should give a shout out. There's a couple friends from Antelope, sort of behind the scenes, handling the switching and the captions and things. Lubo and Vess and Stefan, thank you guys so much for your time on this. And I don't know, these things are always a lot of fun. Oh, we should mention the Discord server. In that same spirit of sort of giving back and being sort of building community around Antelope Audio, we've launched a Discord server. Any of you out there, any Antelope users out there that haven't gotten involved in that yet, you should. The link, whatever, there's a QR code you could scan right here. We got 350 users in there, I think, now. You guys are in on a sort of pro level. We've kind of built it out into a few different roles, it's called, on Discord. But absolutely get involved if you're not. It's a decent hang, a bunch of like-minded audio nerds just talking audio and talking Antelope and keeping each other up to date on control panel updates and sort of all that fun stuff. So definitely jump in there if you haven't. And I guess let's wrap this up. Vess, are you going to play us out with is there some sort of video you're going to play us out with, or how are we going to?
Well, first we should say thank you to you, Todd, for
it's my pleasure. These things are a blast for me. I love this stuff.
Thank you to Todd and to Antelope, and also you, Will, and taking time out of your day on a Friday to talk about stuff that we're also passionate about.
For sure.
And same to you, Bobby.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I guess I'm gonna play us out because I don't think